Hello, hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space. A couple more holiday cards for my 2025 holiday card series. I will have a link in the end screen at the very end of this video to my playlist that I have quite a few videos in now, and I'll continue to add to it as I get holiday cards made. So for today's video, doing some die cutting of watercolor paper, painting said die cuts with Simon Says Stamp Pawsitively saturated inks. One of my favorite things to do. And a little bit of ink blending, some 3D embossing, splatter, all the fun things. So, as always, everything I used will be listed and linked in the description box below the video. My links are affiliate links. That just means that if you click on one of my links and end up placing an order, I do get a little kickback from that at no extra cost to you. That is what helps keep the lights on, pays the bills, enables me to keep bringing out content. And yeah, let's get into making the cards. So my watercolor paper of choice for today's cards was this Strathmore watercolor paper. I've done a bunch of videos on it. Any watercolor paper will work for something like this. I chose my watercolor paper. I did my die cutting off screen, and I used the narrow Holly cluster wafer die, which is quite a large wafer die set. So there's kind of the main portion, and then there's a die that die cuts these little berries and stems, a die for an extra leaf, and then a die for the berries, which I didn't die cut watercolor paper with that. We'll get to that later. And I die cut everything twice, because I thought, well, I have it out. And I also die cut extra leaves and extra little berry stem pieces, because a couple of them I'm going to put on the insides of the cards. And I also wanted an extra leaf for the front of the card. So I took all those die cut pieces and I stuck them to one of my Stamp and Stencil mats. These have a little bit of like low tack adhesive on them. And same thing, I've shown in many videos. I like using these to literally do what I'm doing now, to hold die cut pieces so I can like slap ink or watercolor or whatever onto them. The mats will stain, as you can see. Mine is heavily stained. Don't care. When I'm done, every time I'm done using it, I take everything off of it. I just take it to the sink and I rinse it off with water. Not hot water, just rinse it off with water. It removes whatever excess ink, any staining, doesn't matter. And then I let it air dry. I don't scrub it, because if you scrub it or use soap or anything like that, you'll remove that adhesive and then it's useless. So I just let it air dry, and then I just keep reusing it over and over and over again. I've had the same mats now for, I don't even know how long, a long time. Some of them, like this one, are getting to like almost not sticky at all, but it's still enough just to hold the pieces in place. And then for my watercoloring, I'm using 3 different shades of just positively saturated ink. Any water reactive ink will work, regular watercolors, oxide inks, etc., etc. For me, it just depends on my mood. This is what I grabbed for these ones. And the specific colors was Perfection, Pine, and Juniper. And I just smushed them onto one of my little palettes and then just painted. And this is like the epitome of me going on about, I just slap on the color. That's what I'm doing. Just slap it on. This is really fun, especially if you're interested or curious about watercolor, but it's really intimidating, like coloring in stamped images, that kind of coloring. I very much understand how overwhelming it can be. Something like this, anybody can do this. Die cut some pieces, some little florals, some greenery, whatever, from watercolor paper, slap some ink on it, add a bit of water, slap on some ink, let it dry. Super simple. And just keep playing with it. The more you get to know it and how things move around, it's fun. And I did a bunch of them. I did 2 of the branches, all those extra leaves, the little berry bits, or like berry branch bits. The berries themselves, as you can see, I die cut those just from some scraps of Schoolhouse Red cardstock, because I wasn't gonna like watercolor each individual berry. You could, depending on the look you're going for, but in the back of my mind when I was making this, I was like, I think I might want to add glossy accents. And if you've ever worked with things like glossy accents, stickles, etc., when you try to apply it over anything that's water reactive, but especially reds, it can go funny. So I was like, one, it saves me some time just doing the red cardstock, and two, that will make, because I did end up going with the glossy accents, that'll make it easier. So I assembled it just looking at the package. I added an extra leaf, like I said, just to give it that little extra something. And then I set those aside. Super simple. I also die cut the Brilliant Cardinal. And him I die cut again from just Schoolhouse Red cardstock. Depending on, the look you're going for, etc. I could have die cut him also from watercolor paper and like watercolored him with the inks I'm using to blend. But I wanted that like a solid red. So I die cut the body and the wings from the Schoolhouse Red cardstock and then added some depth to like the little tail feathers and the edges of the wings with a couple shades of inks. I used Sangria, Cabernet is what I'm using right now. Just kind of like, you can see I'm like just flicking the little blending brush from the very edge just to get, that bit of color down. And then after I did the Cabernet, which is a very like deep, wine sort of shade, I also pulled in a bit of cocoa. So just a bit of brown. Because that's the thing too, when you're trying to add depth to like a really intense red cardstock, this Schoolhouse Red cardstock is very, very like red. And sometimes it's really hard to build up that depth. So adding a little bit of brown does give it that little extra something. And then he did the same thing with the little piece that does his legs. It's a little separate piece. And I just die cut that from some brown cardstock, added that cocoa ink, and same thing. Assembling him, super simple. There's the piece for his eye, and then the piece that backs it for his little beak. And then I die cut just little scraps when I was doing all my die cutting. I die cut a scrap of that yellow cardstock, which was honey cardstock, where the eye was, and just inlaid that. You could skip that step, but sometimes I like adding that so it's not just an opening to the back. Does that make sense? Sometimes I like to overthink things. Anyway, it all comes together super simply. So I adhered all the pieces with liquid glue, and I've got this fabulous little cardinal. I just love him, and really easy to assemble. Love that too. So got all my little birds, my two little birds assembled, set those aside. I decided for my background to use the beautiful Poinsettia frame embossing folder, which now that I'm doing this voiceover, I also used this in a recent live stream and did it like kind of the same thing because I loved how this turned out. This just, So I ran that embossing folder through with some Nina Desert Storm cardstock because I love me some craft cardstock. And I then trimmed this down. The pieces when I first embossed them were slightly bigger than A2 sized. So then that way I could trim it down and get it exactly A2 size, so 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, so that this will completely cover my card base. And then I took a white pigment ink pad and just gently rubbed it along all of that embossing. So all those raised edges pick up that ink and it just brings out all that detail while still being fairly subtle because the focus of the card is not going to be this poinsettia frame, but it's just going to give all that extra texture to the background. So after I'd added the ink, I die cut white cardstock with one of the Petal tipped labels dies, and then just glued that down right onto there. So then those embossed poinsettias just frame that up. Love it. Love it so much. And then the branches, also just adhering these with glue. If you really wanted to step these up, you could pop things up with like foam tape, like that frame, pop it up with foam tape, the branch, etc. I just didn't. I just glued everything down. There's enough texture and dimension and everything going on just with all these pieces. So once I get these adhered, I'm of course going to add some splatter. So get these adhered into place, and then I'm going to put these into my splat box. And I also put the individual leaves into the splat box as well. You can't see it on camera, but they're in there as well so that they will also get splatter so they're not left out. So I got everything lined up. I'm going to add white splatter first. So I just grabbed the Hero Arts white acrylic speckle and shook that up, put it on my palette, and then heavily splatter this on both of these card fronts, as well as those, the leaves, just to give everything that extra, texture and everything. So splatter that all over these, and I can't play the music because I would get like copyright struck or whatever, but I was like literally bopping out to music when I was doing this. I found it funny when I was editing. I was like, you can literally tell the way I'm tapping. I was like tapping my brush to the music. I was having a great time. It was fun. So, anywho, after I had added the white splatter, I'm gonna add a little bit of black splatter. Not as much, just a bit. So, use the black acrylic speckle for that. I cleaned off my brush, put a bit of the black speckle on my palette, and then added just a smidge of that onto these backgrounds and onto the individual leaves, and then set everything aside to dry. While it was drying, I am going to heat emboss my sentiments, and I'm using the CZ Design little tree plate greetings set because I love it. I love all these little sentiment sets. So I've got some black cardstock here and my MISTI, and I am going to heat emboss this little Season's Greetings stamp. So I'm going to use my anti-static powder tool first. That just keeps the embossing powder from clinging to anything other than your stamped image. And then I'm going to ink up and stamp the sentiment with clear embossing ink. And I've talked about this before when it comes to smaller sentiments like this, anything with detail, pretty much most stamps in general, really. I would rather ink it up and stamp it multiple times versus inking it up once and then just pressing really hard, because especially with smaller sentiments or, things that have a lot of fine line detail, if you're pressing too hard, you're mushing that stamp like into the cardstock and you're just pressing out. And so that's how sometimes your sentiments end up looking like a blob. So re-ink multiple times and then just lightly stamp. Don't need to do CPR. So after I'd stamped them, I'd coated them with white embossing powder, melted it with my heat tool, buffed away that excess anti-static powder with a cloth, die cut them with the coordinating wafer die. And then while my MISTI was still out, I took another sentiment from that little stamp set, and I'm going to stamp this onto the insides of my cards. So my card bases are going to be top folding A2 white note cards. And I'm going to stamp the sentiment with some just VersaFine Clear Nocturne ink. And there's my little leaf and berry cluster. I just adhered those together off camera and then glue them to the insides of the cards once the sentiments were in place. And then I'd glued the backgrounds to the card bases. The heat embossed sentiments, I die cut scraps from the black cardstock just to back the sentiment, just to give it a little bit more dimension. And then my little Cardinal, I'm going to pop him up with some Big Mama foam tape. Just give it that smidge of extra dimension. So get that into place, and I'm going to have him, he's going to stand. He's going to be like standing on the sentiment. So I get him into place, and then I adhered the heat embossed and die cut sentiment, and then I took a white gel pen. Since the bird wasn't on there, I didn't want to get splatter on him this time. Sometimes I don't care. It just depends on my mood. Sometimes there is no rhyme or reason. It just is. So, no splatter on him, but instead I just used a white gel pen and added a few little dots and highlights, and then glossy accents. So, glossy accents on these berries, and since they're done in the red cardstock, like nothing's gonna run or turn orange or go weird, because again, sometimes just inks, especially reds, can go a little bit weird with products like glossy accents, stickles, etc., because they're so liquidy. As they're drying, they start wicking up that color and it just gets weird. But these were red cardstock, so they were fine. So I applied the glossy accents, and then you could leave it there and it would just let it dry and it'll be, shiny and fabulous. But I poured rock candy distress glitter over it, so they end up looking like sugary. You can't go wrong with rock candy. So I applied the glossy accents, poured over the glitter, tapped off the excess, let it dry, which, depending on how thick you apply it, your climate, all the things, it doesn't take that long. Once it was fully dry, I take just my big fluffy brush and I just brush it over just to pick up any random bits of glitter, With rock candy, there usually isn't much because this glitter isn't staticky, but it's just habit. So I just brush it really good after everything is fully dry. And then the cards are good to go. So we've got like depth from watercoloring with the inks on the holly branch. And then we've got texture from the embossing folder. We've also got the texture from the glossy accents and the rock candy glitter. And we've got splatter and we've got the bird. And these were fun. These were a lot of fun. So, like I mentioned, there you go. Now you can kind of see rock candy. Can't go wrong, honestly. Love it. So, like I mentioned in the intro, I'll have links to all the things in the description box below, as well as a link to my playlist at the very end for you to check out if you are interested. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me, for thumbs upping and commenting. I appreciate it a ton, and I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye. Thank you so much to my amazing Patreon supporters. For anyone that might be interested in joining my Patreon community and supporting me, the link to my Patreon is in the description box below the video. For everyone else, as always, thank you all so much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't, I'd love to have you. And here's a couple other videos for you to check out in case you missed them. Bye!